going on, guys? Zedd here, bringing you my Farseer's Domain early tier list. As you guys know, I very much like tier lists, or if you don't know, I very much like tier lists. This game is sort of the spiritual successor to a game called Atlas Reactor, and a game I put thousands of hours into, even more than Soul Calibur, and frankly, I was pretty good. If I dare say myself. It is a tactics-based game and player versus player, and it's you take your turns at the same time, so it's not turn-based. Yeah. Anyway, so that's what the game is. If you don't know what it is, check it out. Check out some of my past stream VODs. Anyway, moving on to the tier list part. So, this is the kind of game where team composition and how you play the characters really matter a lot. But I'm going to set some ground rules and explain the parameters that I have set here on the tier list, so that way things make a little more sense. So first up, number one, I'm doing them based on I'm doing them alphabetically, and then I'm doing them by their class. So for example, we're doing all of the frontliners first, and then we're doing all of the firepowers, and then we're doing all of the supports. I don't know why that took me so long to say, but that's what we're doing. And then within those categories, they will be alphabetized. So for example, if you had Tasha and Violetta, the Tasha would be ahead of Violetta, but that doesn't mean that Tasha is better than Violetta, okay? So yeah, alphabetical, by their class. We're going to go class by class as well, so all the frontliners will be first, just so we're clear. So I'm not necessarily saying because the frontliner is going to be at the front of every list that frontliners are always better than the other two, okay? I just want to make that clear. Another thing before we get into it is I'm going to explain these letters a little bit. So there are 4 tiers. S, consistently strong. These are going to be characters that basically are never a bad pick. Well, in my opinion, never a bad pick, or at least a good pick over majority of the time. A is situationally strong. These are basically just slightly weaker versions of the S tier, but they may have better niche situations, but then maybe slightly worse averages. But overall, it's like if a bunch of the S tier was banned out, you'd probably default to the A tier. So S and A are pretty interchangeable. You could pick a comp from any of these characters, and I don't think you'll be upset with what you get. B tier is niche or flex picks. What this means is the niche part refers to they're good on maybe one specific map or with one specific other character on their team, or maybe in one specific team composition. On that note, I should specify I'm making this list off of higher level play, so assuming all the players are good and they know what's going on. I'm not talking about pub stomping. I'm not really talking about like solo queue necessarily, unless I state otherwise. I'm assuming competitive play. Also, if a character is really good in one situation, that means they can be picked. Let's be clear. And then flex picks means you could pick them to sort of fill in the roster if you've got maybe 3 people from S and A, but then it's on a map, or you want to counter pick that needs that 4th pick. You're probably going to pick it from the B tier. But outside of those niches, the B tier is typically considered pretty weak. And then the C tier is just, I would never pick those characters. Lacking or inconsistent, it'll kind of make more sense when we get there, but I think C tier are the characters that need changes or fixes or buffs. S tier can maybe use a small tone down, but A and B are fine. I think it's good to have niche picks in a game like this. I don't think you necessarily want every character to be good in every situation all the time. That just isn't really all that fun. But nonetheless, it's a tier list, it's a categorization, it's my opinion, it's whatever you want. I'm going to try to make a solid argument for everybody as best I can. But let's just get right into it. So again, starting with the frontliners, this doesn't necessarily mean this character is top 1, but number 1, we got Juliet. So Juliet honestly is, in my opinion, the best character in the game. And the reason why is she fulfills the frontliner role perfectly. She has CC, she has a weaken, so she has a status condition or utility. She deals really good damage. She has a self shield that also reduces her cooldown if the shield is expended, which is pretty easy to do as a frontliner, so she has cooldown reduction. Her Ulti walls happen in the prep phase, which means she has a weaken that happens in the prep phase, which means there's automatically value. Any ult that can give value no matter what is always a good ult, typically. Not only that, but it leaves lingering cover for her, which is super unique and further emphasizes her frontline capabilities. Her dash is one of the best in the game. It has a lot of control. It can hit a lot of different people at the same time, in conjunction with her circle attack, which is CC. So Juliet has damage, CC, tankiness, mobility, utility, pretty good range on her attack, decent damage, cooldown reduction. She literally has everything except for healing. I really don't see how Juliet is ever a bad pick. She's just so consistent, and she's not even terribly hard to play, but that's the thing is, I think she's pretty easy to play, but the better you get at her and the better you are at the game, she just keeps on getting better. She doesn't really hold you back, and you don't really hold her back. I think she's ridiculous. Such a complete character. But not broken. I think that she's just so complete. But her only weakness, if I had to say, would be, yeah, no self-sustain, which can be an issue because a lot of the other tanks do have some form of actual healing, but Juliet does not. If you want to call that a weakness, sure. But anywho, I think Juliet's incredible. I think she's incredible. Right, and so next up we have Emulsion. So that's it for the frontliners in the S category. So now we're moving on to the A, so situationally strong. Emulsion, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. He's pretty good. He's a frontliner who basically thrives on chasing and hasting, and he has a lot of stick-to power. He has fairly good range for a frontliner unit. His sustain comes in the form of his passive, which will heal him and deal damage to any enemies that are in a 3x3 circle around him, which sounds tricky, but if you have your team CC, good haste movement, or good movement in general, he has a really good dash with a slow as well, so you can really set it up. And because his dash has a slow, even though it only does, I think, 10 damage, you can dash past somebody, anticipate where they're going to walk to. They only move 2 squares typically, and then all of a sudden you get your passive 2 turns in a row and there's nothing they can do about it. So this character is really sticky. He's really difficult to deal with. His sustain is pretty decent, and you know, you can't really go wrong with the character. He does relatively high damage, but again, his sustain and tanky factor is reliant on actually being right beside the opponent. But in lieu of that, he does bring a lot of CC and sticky potential. It's hard to get an Emulsion off of you, and it's hard to get away from Emulsion without just full committing to a haste, which means if you're a firepower or a support, you're not healing or dealing damage, which is fairly good. So, really solid character. Not quite as complete as Juliet, for example. That's why he's down here, but honestly, a really solid character. You can't really go wrong. Yeah, next up we have Croc. So again, it is alphabetical, so I'm not necessarily saying Emulsion is better than Croc. I think they're both pretty good. And that's the last time I'm going to repeat that, so don't think that Croc is worse than Emulsion, or vice versa, based on my tier list, alright? Good. So Croc is really good. He's a very basic character. He only has 1 CC though, and that right there is his one weakness. That's why he's not really as complete as Juliet. He has a root, yes, but it's only a single target, and it's his only ranged ability. Is a root good? Yeah, absolutely, for sure. But outside of that, he has pretty mediocre range, and his sustain is reliant on a read, so he pops his genetic heal, and he has to then take a ton of damage to then heal a ton of damage. So if he's wrong or gets really low value out of the heal, it can be pretty upsetting. On the contrary, if you overcommit to a Croc and he uses the heal, then the dude is basically unkillable. On top of that, his ultimate gives him shields and a damaging AoE for multiple turns in a row, again, making him incredibly hard to kill. So if you cycle your cooldowns, because he has a dash, granted it has no CC like Emulsion's, you have the dash, you have the genetic augmentation heal, you have, I think it's 3 full turns of the ult, or 2 or 3 full turns of the ult, so that's shielding for 2 to 3 turns. And you have the root, so you cycle all these cooldowns and all these things on top of Catalyst, and Croc is just incredibly difficult to deal with. He just doesn't have like immediate sustain or shielding without his ulti, and his range is a bit lacking compared to some of the other frontliners, but overall, really strong character. Um, yeah, again, can't really go wrong with a Croc. So that's it for the frontliners in the A tier. Moving on to the B tier, the niche or flex picks. First up, we have Dargrim. So Dargrim is a pretty cool design. His whole shtick is he wants to basically plop down a bunch of AoEs and hope that you run into them or stand in them, right? So he's sort of relying on the opponents not anticipating what he's going to do and then not walking out of what he's doing. His damage on his primary base is quite low, and he has a weird dynamic where he doesn't want to be right in front of the opponent because it does less damage than being further away. Apologize, allergies. And so that's a little weird for a frontliner, but you can definitely play around it. He does have fairly good range, but lower damage. Really what sets him apart is his dash ultimate synergy. So you pop the ulti, which is a free action, and a big AoE damaging around you, and then you dash in, which is 2 damaging AoEs, and then you're just damaging AoE. The problem is that's kind of where the story ends. His sustain is reliant on the opponent's dealing direct damage to the enemies that he is near, so you know that's going to be hit or miss. He doesn't really have any form of any form of healing or shielding outside of that. He does have a CC where it knocks the opponents either left or right. The problem is it only knocks the opponents left or right as opposed to back. I have found that many times it's superior to knock an opponent back as opposed to side, but it's still really good to have. There are synergies that can be played there, and that's sort of where I think Dargrim shines. His ability as a tank, in my opinion, is kind of low, but he is a fairly good close range AoE damage dealer, and he's good at controlling space for that reason. However, without synergies, like just for example, the Regulator Trap or the Yuri Nuke or Rug Wall, Vex Wall, things like that, right? Without things to just punt the opponent into, I feel like Dargrim lacks a lot of value. And again, not having the best tanking abilities, it's kind of rough. And then having relatively low damage outside of, again, the dash ult synergy, not so great. He does have a fairly unique trap ability, which does a low amount of damage up front, but then pops an AoE around the opponent on the following turn, which can incentivize players not to move. The problem is they can dash, and if they dash, they can avoid that AoE. So yes, it forces a dash, but at the same time, they could go to a really safe spot or safe situation, and then you don't really get value. So I think he's okay, but I would certainly pick him with other traps and CC. I don't think he alone would be the tank I'd go for, you know, in my 2-on-1 composition, but you could make him work. I don't think he's the best standalone tank, though. He definitely needs those synergies, and he needs those synergies to work. So a lot of what ifs in order for Dargrim to really shine, in my opinion. Moving on to Delphinia. Delphinia, kind of in the same boat, bit more of a niche pick, does have the CC, very similar, could really benefit from those synergies. However, Delphinia's shtick comes from the fact that she has a super long range dash that can be quite useful for body blocking, at least one shot. The problem is you can only body block one shot, and other than that, she's going to start getting abused. Whereas the character you just body blocked for, it probably would have been better to just either shield them with a support or have them dash out of the way to avoid the damage in the first place, instead of you taking the damage just to proc your other dash. That's sort of what I don't like about this character is, in order to get the superior dash, you have to use the weaker dash and intentionally take damage, which is a bit odd to me. She does have an awkward CC in the form of her Frostbite, where I believe it's 3 stacks and then you get a root. The problem is, at least I have found, the problem with Delphinia is landing 3 Frostbite moves in a row. Unless you are cycling your abilities on the same target over and over and over, and even then, if you skip, I think, 1 turn, it's just gone. So by the 2nd turn, right, they won't have it. But where she shines the most is the fact she has an anti-heal. There's only, I think, 3 or 4 in the game total, and so that can be quite useful. So say if the opponent picks a character like Croc, right, and you anticipate he's going to use the heal, you just stab him, and then all that, half of that healing that he should have received, total, half the healing total, is completely cut for a turn, which is insanely powerful. So if your opponent chooses Delphinia, you have to be aware that your healing could very well be useless the following turn, and you really want to prioritize shielding over healing. So in that sense, she does her job, but again, low damage, 4-ish tanking value, inconsistent CC. She's not a bad character. I just think she's, for the niche of anti-healing, I think she's very good, obviously, because there's only a couple anti-healings in the game. But I think it's easy enough to sort of just disrespect her and avoid her damage altogether outside of the 2 large dashes. And even then, if you don't shoot her after her first dash, that dash is not a threat. It's only the second dash that you want to worry about. So inconsistent, bit weird, but great anti-healing if they've got a lot of healing. Not a terrible pick, but not super strong either. Next up we have Vex. So Vex, this one might be a bit of a hot take. So Vex to me is actually kind of weak as a solo frontline in a standard 2-1-1 composition. However, I think she thrives in a 1-2-1 environment, whereas 1 firepower, 1 support, 2 frontline. The reason I say this is her whole thing is through wall damage, right? Your 1 goes through walls, your dash goes through walls, you have your wall, which is prep phase, which can essentially be used over walls and around walls. The problem is her tanking abilities come in the form of hard reads and very situational problems. So you have to steal the healing from somebody else essentially. But she herself has pretty, kind of piss poor tanking. But to make up for that, she does her stuff through walls, right? So theoretically, you would just use the world as your tanking, right? The full covers and such. Thing is, part of the frontline's job is to give vision to the team so the team knows where to go and where to shoot, where is safe, where is not. I don't feel like Vex really does that job, but she does deal some insane damage numbers. She can have some really nice CC with the wall, and if she can get the dashes off in really good positions, she can dash literally across the screen. It's so powerful, but I don't think she thrives as like a vision gaining frontliner. I think there are much stronger options than Vex, and that's where I think she struggles a little bit. But on certain maps, like for example, I think she's really strong in a Graveyard, because Graveyard has so much full cover that she's good at sort of opening up those holes and just forcing the issue. But overall, I don't think she's a fantastic tank, even though she's a frontliner, and she does play like a frontliner, right? Don't misunderstand. I'm not saying she's a firepower. But in terms of granting your team vision, I just don't think Vex really does it. And that's kind of where she struggles a bit. If she did, I don't know, if she could see through walls, for example, then, now we're talking, right? If she could see through walls, that would be absurd. But that's not the case, so here we are. So last up for frontliners, we have Barb. So I think Barb is, I genuinely think Barb is the most useless character in the game. I would take Vex or Dargrim over Barb in almost every single situation, if not every single situation. Barb has decent, fairly strong but its range is awful. His heal is a bit awkward to land. It requires the opponents to be all grouped up. His ranged AoE as a slow, it's kind of cool that he has a ranged AoE slow, but the thing is, it's such a long cooldown, and it only comes off of cooldowns if the opponent swings at Barb. Here's the kicker. Why would you swing at Barb, right? His range is bad, so if you can outmaneuver him and just kite him, he's completely useless. If you land, I know he gets constant unstoppables, but without having constant haste, or without having the ability to just constantly be chasing the opponents, Barb is useless. He's always playing the chasing game. He's never in a position where he can just control. And that's where I think Barb struggles, is you're just sort of in the way. You're not really or no, you're just sort of there. You're not even in the way, which is what you want to be as a frontliner. Yeah, he's beefy, but he just doesn't do it for me. The best thing about this character is, in my opinion, the pull. It's not even his ulti, and because the ulti means that you can't chase that turn, and you're kind of being predictive with where the opponent wants to go. Because I might argue it's better to walk on the same turn and go in the better spot than it would be to ult to deal damage and end up where they are and where they're not. Like, you're sort of playing this chase game with Barb, you know, and it's just bad. I don't see why you'd ever pick Barb. I don't see a world where it's like Barb is the pick here. And that's why I think he's lacking and inconsistent. I don't really know what you would want to do to make him better, but there's so many turns where Barbs just feel useless, and you just kind of forget he exists. Like, oh, I have a tank. What? He's a meat shield, basically. That's it. And even then, he's not even the best meat shield in the game. So, yeah, no. Barb is awful. Worst frontline in the game, in my opinion. And there you go. That's it for frontline. So next up, we have fire powers. So, and with that said, first up, Eris. So Eris is a very strong firepower. Her biggest thing is she doesn't have any dash. However, outside of a dash, she basically has every tool you could ask for from your character. She has healing, shielding, unstoppable, AoEs, traps, through wall damage, cone damage, high damage, self haste, high energy gain, slow. Like, she does everything in the game, literally, except it's on, like, you can only use those moves in sequence with each other. Like, you can't use the heal, or the shield rather, twice in a row. You can't use the fire traps twice in a row, right? So her passive is what keeps her balanced. I put that in quotes because if you cycle the cooldowns well and situationally, she's ridiculous. And she's, yeah, really, that's all there is to say about Eris. She does everything well, except she doesn't have a dash, and that's the only weakness. And a lot of characters don't have a dash, so I just think she's insane. I don't know what else there is to say. Really, there's nothing much else to say. High numbers, self-sustain, self-peel, huge, powerful AoE, passives that are really strong. Yeah, just no dash. That's it. That's really the only weakness with this character. No dash. But everything else is super powerful. You'd be hard-pressed to find an Eris weakness that is exploitable, other than no dash. Okay. Cool. Let's just move on. I think she's ridiculous. Where is he here? Galactus. So Galactus is a little bit of a one-trick pony, and by that I mean he just does damage, right? But he does a lot of it, right? He does a lot of coverless damage. That's his best thing. His dash is a little weird, but he has one, and he does more damage than Eris. He's a bit more straightforward in terms of how the damage is dealt, in that, you know, the one ability is a beam attack, but you can bounce it. You know, he has a grenade. You know, where it gets tricky is placing the tiles and then the ulti, getting a decent bounce on the ulti. The thing is, once he has so many tiles down, the ulti is just always going to be strong and high value. He's always going to have places to dash. So this character starts off the game strong and only gets stronger as the game goes on. He just does so much raw damage that, like, there's really nothing more to him, granted. But that's all you want out of your firepower, is consistent, strong, powerful damage. And Galactus brings it to the table from ridiculous ranges as well. Just when you think you're safe, Galactus can just do coverless damage to you and you're dead. Or he ults and it's like 40 to 60 damage. Like, yeah, no, Galactus is crazy. Really powerful on so many maps, particularly the smaller ones. And yeah, he's just really, really, really strong. Literally, in terms of damage output. So yeah, not much to say there either, honestly. Firepowers are a lot more straightforward than the frontliners, can't you tell? Alright, next up I have Lilvana. So this one, you know, you might think, well, surely how can Lilvana be as strong as, Galactus? Well, I think so, and the reason why is Lilvana has 34 damage at pretty high range on the one, which is good. Coverless damage AoE, has a pretty far dash that gives haste the next turn, so it's 2 turns of mobility. An ulti that's like full screen and goes through walls for one of the shots, and then the hostage, which is good for a dash read. Like, this character has everything you want out of a firepower: coverless damage, far range, high base value, a good dash, mobility, a fantastic ultimate, and a trap just in case you read the opponent dashing. And all of that bunched together with a passive, which whenever they gain energized, they gain might, which is crazy because while that may not sound strong to you by default, let's reword that. Lilvana gains twice as many might power-ups as every other character in the game. Right? So any energized pickup and might pickup and haste catalyst, or energized catalyst, and Mebs, right? There's so many ways for Lilvana to have might, it's ridiculous. And like good AoE, good single target, good mobility, just the whole meal deal. The difference between Lilvana and Galactus is Galactus doesn't have access to that might, but instead deals more consistent coverless damage at slightly smaller values, and a bit of an awkward ultimate to use, requires setup, whereas Lilvana is sort of swinging right out of the gate, like powerful at all stages of the game, has a really good ulti that, like, just a much more straightforward kit. They're both really strong in their own right, and I think if you picked, both of them, I think you'd be fine. I think they're both really strong right now. So that's it for the S tier firepowers for me. Next up we have Haka. So Haka is Haka's a very weird character, but he's very strong. He deals high damage, he has good mobility. He's sort of a firepower frontline hybrid, but you wouldn't want to use him as your frontliner solo, in my opinion. But here's where Haka sets himself apart. He is one of the few characters who can control vision. Now, there's not a lot of means of gaining vision or revealing targets in Farseer's domain, at least right now. And because of that, Haka can be quite powerful. He deals crazy damage in an AoE, has multiple access to vision denial with the smoke, and just in general controls the vision game better than anybody in the game. And so for that reason, I think he's really, really strong, and he makes every unseen area on the screen a threat. And he can just deny chase attempts, he can deny firepower line of sight. Like, there's so much utility with smoke on top of his really high damage that you can't not say that he's a really strong character. Now, granted, he's pretty tricky to play well, but if you can, I think he's really strong. And really, that's sort of all there is to it. Next up, I have Tasha. So Tasha is going to start hitting mad numbers if she gets her combos off well, right? So she has her AoE around her, Lightning Storm, and then she has the placeable Lightning Storm, whatever that move's called. And then she has the Lightning Bolt, which is the zigzag, which does 30 damage uncovered. So theoretically, in one turn, you could swing for over 50 damage, and that's without an ultimate, by the way. And yeah, so she does insane damage. She has a dash, but it's on her ulti. But the thing is, you can use it like more than once, quite frequently, even from earlier stages in the game. She just hits. She can hit so hard. But here's the thing with Tasha, right? And this sets her apart from Omicron, which we'll get to later. Tasha doesn't need her abilities to combo in order to optimize her damage, or not to optimize, because obviously it'd be optimal, but she doesn't need them to combo in order to deal good damage, is what I should say. And that's what makes her so strong. If Tasha gets a good setup on you, you're done. You're screwed. But even if she doesn't, she still does good damage. like, she's a little bit shorter range, but that's okay. You're sort of a brawler character. You're sort of in and you're out. She has shielding though, which basically no firepower does, and so she has the sustain, she has a dash, she has really good damage, a lot of AoE, like everything is AoE. Just really solid complete kit. Tricky to play, doesn't require the combos, but if you can get some good combos off, she's insane. She's insane. Next up we have Violetta. Violetta is a fairly straightforward character. You know, jet set, ready, boom boom, go. That's it. Pew pew. Power up my shot, gain haste, gain might, pew pew. And that's it. Honestly. Where she shines though is her AoE damage and her just raw DPS output is so high. On the flip side though, she does need to sort of take a turn to prep that super high damage, but even if she doesn't do that, her 1 does fine damage on its own. And what makes it more special is it can bounce off of artifacts to either go further or simply ignore cover. And so what some characters long for via coverless damage, she can just do it anyway. Like just for example, Izine or Yuri, right? They can deal coverless damage, but so can Violetta, and she does so much more damage as well that, you know, she's just so strong. And her ultimate being a prep phase trap that covers a huge part of the screen is just ridiculous. It's such a strong move. It's such a strong trap. It's the best trap in the game. And really there's nothing you can do about it other than not move or just hope, because of how many times it bounces. You can't expect to outplay it. It's such a good move. Her whole kit's really strong. Even if you try to focus her down, she has a great dash. And then haste to just get on out of there, reposition, boom, you're dead again. She's so hard to lock down, but she herself can run you down. So, really good character. Pretty hard to deal with in general. Alright, that is it for the A tier fire powers. Next up we have, speaking of, Izine. So Izine is a bit of a weird one. She has a ton of full action moves that don't really impact, like, that don't deal damage, right? And that's sort of a common complaint you see with this character. Like, if it's her dash, she doesn't get haste, right? Or not her dash. Her invis, if she uses her invis for might, she doesn't gain haste, which a lot of people have mentioned is a problem, because then she can't reposition to get a really good shot, right? Her dash has no move afterwards and no invisible, but it does go through walls. Where she shines though is her anti-heal. So again, one of the only characters with anti-healing like Delphenia. The problem though is Izine, while she can do coverless damage by bouncing it off walls, it's only 30. Other characters can do very comparable things, and some can even do more than her. Again, like Galactus is a great example. The anti-healing is good though, and her ultimate, both reducing healing and revealing, is quite good, but I think the ultimate is where it's kind of the only thing that Izine does really, really well. Honestly, I think everything else is very ho-hum. There's a lot of turns where Izine is doing nothing, and that's a problem. She's very squishy. She doesn't have a lot of utility in the kit other than the anti-heal. So a little one-dimensional, and if you can lock her down, she's not very strong. Or she's not going to live very long, is maybe what I should say. But if they have a lot of healing, or they're running like a double support comp, Izine pretty good. And that's where she gets her niche from. But yeah, you could play her, but just be aware that you're going to have a pretty rough time staying alive if you're caught out. Oh, furthermore, her invis doesn't last during that turn's movement phase, so you can't even reposition safely. You just sort of have to run away. It's a very awkward playstyle. It doesn't really lend itself to being visible for too long, but if you're going to play like that, just play Haka, right? And that's the problem. Or if you're going to do high coverless damage, just play Galactus, which is why I'm saying if you're going to pick Izine, it's going to be for the anti-heal. Yeah. Next up, Omicron. So Omicron is a very cool character. He's based on predictions, or his design is read-based and prediction-based. And his whole thing is he sets up damage for the following turn while dealing while dealing average damage on the current turn. I believe his one ability is 30 damage, which is a bit below the highest and a little bit above the lowest. so average. But it leaves behind a trail that does damage on the next turn on those spots. The thing is, and this is where Omicron shines, if the opponent is CC'd, then his laser face, his 1, and his ulti can all just completely obliterate. Like, you can 100 to 0 a squishy target, no problem. No problem. His dash is very good. He dashes a direction, chucks a AoE slow that does 15 damage. It's really strong, and then he can reposition as well. So definitely one of the best dashes in the game, in my opinion. But the thing is, and he can use that to reposition as well. The thing is, if you don't chase the character, and you just sort of pepper him from range, because he's not the farthest reaching firepower in the game, he can have a really hard time. But again, in those compositions that have a lot of CC, so just for example, Dargrim, right? Dargrim is a fantastic character with Omicron, or a character like Juliet, right? Omicron can really shine. It's just you really need that synergy, and that's the thing. He relies on his teammates to make himself work. Now, in a coordinated setting, is this possible? Absolutely. But the thing is, you need those CCs to land. You need the opponents to not be unstoppable. You need them to not dash. You need this, you need that, and all these things. If you're not getting the doubled up damage, the combo damage, Omicron's damage is kind of lackluster. And not to mention his ultimate, the big 50 damage AoE, isn't even something that immediately does damage. Right? So it sets up for the kill, but they could just dash away, and so you're getting no value out of the ultimate other than getting dashes, which is valuable, but you know, not immediate value. So Omicron can be the strongest firepower in the game statistically, technically, and on paper. However, the reality is there's so many things the opponents can do to challenge Omicron that it doesn't really work out that way. But if you have a ton of CC, he's a great pick. So again, like if you've got a Dargrim on your team, or even Delphinia, I guess, but probably just Dargrim, you could probably make this character work really well. So keep that in mind as well. But for that reason, he's a niche pick. He's not bad though, but it takes a lot to make him work. Next up, Scrapper. Oh. Scrapper. Scrapper is he theoretically can be a very powerful character. His one ability is an AoE, regardless, so like never needs to be a single target character. His grenade is incredible. It applies a debuff where any shielding you get is completely reduced. It's like Izine's ultimate for healing, except Scrapper does it for shields, which is quite unique, and that is where his niche comes into play. The other thing that he's good at is he's good at brawling. So his dash is fairly decent. He heals for a portion of the damage that he deals with his heal, and his passive reduces his cooldowns based on how many enemies he hits above 2. The problem with Scrapper, and his passive is sort of the problem, his cooldowns are so long, that you have to be hitting multiple targets, which if the opponents are positioning well, not really gonna happen. However, his ultimate and his grenade are where the character really shines, in my opinion. The grenade, again, reducing the shield output by 99%, I believe, and the ultimate being basically a big vacuum that does really, really high damage and pulls them all in. So again, like if you had Omicron and Scrapper as your two firepowers, the consistency of the damage output wouldn't be there, but the potential damage would definitely be there. But that's just it. Is, you know, are you going to go for all those synergies, or would you rather just pick a team that's a little more consistent? Maybe now you can start to see why I'm putting these characters in the B tier, right? It's like, how do you consistently deal high damage when your high damage relies on cooldowns from your teammates and them being in range, and etc, etc, etc. So Scrapper, I don't think they're the strongest character, but I think if you can set them up, or you pick them into someone like a Winifred, right? So if Winifred is on the other team, he can be a really strong character. Yeah, because of all the shielding that Winifred has access to. Pretty good in that situation, but overall not a super consistent pick, in my opinion, but not a bad pick either. Next up we have Cephaline, Goth Waifu. So Cephaline is a really cool character. She offers a lot of unique utility in the firepower role. However, where Cephaline struggles a little bit is she doesn't have that sort of big AoE. She doesn't have really any AoE damage, and so she's all single target, and it's only 34. Other characters can deal more than that, and it's an inconsistent 34, no less. It's not the farthest reaching 34. But her whole thing is you kind of want to jump to a target and then reposition. Again, one of the best dashes in the game, similar to Omicron. And then use your weaken AoE, which extends any debuffs, generic debuffs that the opponent has, so things like the weaken and the slow that you're already applying from your dash and your AoE. So they're going to be weakened and slowed for 2 full turns, which is actually really, really powerful. So you want to dash on someone and stick to someone. You're almost like a pseudo frontliner, kind of like Haka, but you can play sort of at a mid-range like Tasha. That's sort of my next point, though, is if you're going to pick Cephaline, why not pick Tasha? However, where she is cool is if the opponents, if you're picking your team and you've got some solid fundamental picks, but you're sort of lacking one key factor, whether it's healing, whether it's a high damage ultimate, or maybe it's you know, some sort of setup or CC, that's where Cephaline can shine. So if you've already picked her early on, and I think she's a pretty strong early pick, then the opponent picks their team. You can steal their ultimates, so now A, they can't use their ultimates the next turn, and B, you get that ultimate that you need. So in that sense, she's super flexible. She sort of defines the flex pick category of this group of characters. On top of that, her trap system, albeit a little weak, is quite nice for giving vision to your team. And like I had mentioned earlier in the tier list, there's not a whole lot of means of gaining vision in Farseer's domain other than your face. And so Cephaline does bring that to the table as well. So she's not a bad pick. It's just important to recognize that she may not be the most damaging pick, but she does bring a lot of utility to the team. So you'd probably want to pair her with someone like a frontliner who can probably stay in with her, but then also a firepower who maybe does high consistent damage but doesn't really bring the utility. So for example, Lilvana, Galactos, even Violetta, those kinds of characters work pretty well with Cephaline, but she herself is not going to be your firepower carry. So she's a flex pick, not a niche pick. I think you could pick her and feel fine, but I think that, you know, you want to make sure you've got your other firepower dealing solid, consistent damage first before you pick her. But pretty decent nonetheless. Next up we have Tiamnata. Tiamnata is a bit of a weird one for me. I'm not sure when you would pick this character, but I know that the character can be picked. However, I don't think that they're as strong and consistent as the firepowers above them, I don't know. Where Tiamnata shines is they have a teleport dash as opposed to a regular dash. That's very strong. That can be quite ambiguous. And it also works in unison with their passive, where you can teleport into a cloud that you just created, and the opponents don't technically know which one you're in. The problem is you may be teleporting into a place that has no cover. That's a problem. Where TM shines, though, is the access to damage. So almost every turn you're able to deal some sort of damage. And the ultimate being basically a drop-down ultimate, you don't need to be in line of sight, and it does a ton of damage. However, just because you're hitting 30 damage not in line of sight doesn't mean you're dealing more damage than other firepowers. You could pick another firepower, deal more damage, and still be super safe. And that's where I think Tiamnata sort of falls off a bit. It's a lot easier to play in a safe position with this character and still deal high damage, but if you improve as a player and your team coordination, you can play higher damage firepowers in a equally as safe way as you would play Tiamnata, and that's where I think they sort of fall off a little bit. But if the map does have a lot of full cover or a lot of invisible bushes to work with, I think Tiamnata can shine. I'm just not really sure they'd be your first pick. So I think this character is definitely map dependent and team dependent, because they're not going to be giving any vision for your team, and they definitely need some sort of help in the damage department on their own. But Yeah, a decent pick. I wouldn't say they're lacking or inconsistent. I would just say they're a little bit weaker. And I think an okay flex pick if you wanted that long range, but then the ability to dash as well. So in that sense, I think they're decent. Next up, Yuri. So Yuri, kind of the same thing as Tiamnata, actually. Everything I just said sort of applies in the same vein, right? You play from super far away, you try to just play on the outskirts of the map. However, Yuri relies on the teammate's vision, so 100% this character relies on the team to work. The cool thing, though, is Yuri has synergies, whereas Tiamnata does not. Yuri can be paired with a CC of some sort, pop, set up the nuke, and you're forcing a dash or a death, right? Dash or death situation. And so that is really, really strong. Their ability to play behind full cover for the entire game is nice, but again, like I mentioned with Tiamnata, if you can just position well with other frontline or fire powers, there's no reason to be dealing less damage than other characters, because oftentimes with Yuri you're dealing 20 or 28 and no more than that. Their ultimate is pretty nice. It's a ginormous AoE dash that roots, so that's nice. The thing is, if you're not being pressured, then you're sitting on this ult charge for so long, and so now other firepowers who could have ulted and done even more damage than you, aren't dealing their damage because you picked Yuri, right? So if Yuri is never focused, it's just 28, 28, 28, the odd 30, 28, 28, but the ultimate is never really going to get value. So outside of the CC nuke synergy, I don't know why you'd pick Yuri. If you find the character fun, sure, but I think there are much more powerful picks to choose. Yeah, but it's not a weak character, it's just there are issues, and I think there are stronger characters. And if Yuri gets bum rushed down, it can be pretty rough to deal with. And that's it for my B tier firepowers, which leaves us with 2. So first up, Frug. Frug, I really don't think this character is any good. This one's probably a little bit of a hot take, but Frug rocks dealing like, what is it, 24 damage, I believe it is. Yeah, 24 damage. That's just not enough, dude. Like, it doesn't matter that they're 3x3s. You're not gonna hit multiple enemies. You're just not. And so the fact that you can just go pew 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 and hit 24 damage, ooh, like frontliners are doing more damage than you. Like, no. Frug has no dash. His ultimate can basically be useless without, like, even with setup, it can be useless. The best part about this character, honestly, in my opinion, is his wall. His passive is pretty useless. Getting that extra rock bounce is more useless than it is useful. The healing in the pool, only applying in the blast phase, is a big no-no for me. If it healed during like the prep phase, or if allies walked into it, I would like that more than in the blast phase. The ulti popping off of his wall, his passive, or his AoE just doesn't cut it for me. It takes way too much setup for way too little reward, and even then it's quite predictable, and if you rush a Frug down, there's actually nothing he can do. I don't think this character is any good. I think this character is a little bit of a pub stomper. Even if it was a protect the president sort of comp where it was like Frug was your damage and you just only created space for Frug, I still don't think that he would be a strong choice. And honestly, I've yet to see someone show me otherwise, or I've yet to play a game where I'm like, damn, this Frug is really popping off. Like, no, he's just sort of there, and I'm like, all right, cool, whatever. Yeah, that's pretty much it for Frug. Lastly, and sort of transitioning to Regulator. So if you were gonna pick Frug, I would just pick Reggie, because Reggie at least does way more damage on a shot-by-shot basis from sitting far away. Yeah, sure, it's not coverless, but it's not 24. He has a trap, which is basically the same function as the Frug wall. He has an ulti that goes through walls and does a ton of damage. And he has a better utility via smoke control versus Frug's, I guess, wall. I guess Frug doesn't really do any utility. However, While I do think Regulator is better than Frog, I think Frog is the worst firepower in the game, period. Uh, Regulator, I think, is up there, or I should say down there. Regulator is only good on like one map, maybe two, and he requires space, he requires team coordination, he requires the enemy frontliner to not just hone in on you. So many things have to go right to pick Reggie, and if you wanted to use him for just high damage from long range, there are other options that are a bit more consistent, or at least safer, like for example TM Nada. If you wanted to pick a character like Reggie, you could pick TM or Yuri. Furthermore, if Reggie is bum rushed, he only has his catalyst and he relies on a haste to get away. But if that haste is red, he's just done. He's dead. He's Dunskies. And if you wanted to pick him for the LOS and smoke, just pick Haka. I think Reggie, like, yeah, he does a ton of single target damage. Obviously, he should. He's a sniper. But I think in the grand scheme of things, I just don't think that's enough. Like, so much has to go right in order for him to really shine, and it's just like pew pew pew. But if you're going to enable Regulator to shoot that often and deal that much damage, you could pick other characters to shoot that often and deal that much damage, you see? And that's sort of my argument with Reggie, is it's like, okay, cool, I'm doing all this damage, but I could be doing this much damage with other characters. And have a dash, right? So, like Violetta, Galactos, Lovana, like again, even TM Nada, like you could pick any of those characters, deal comparable or even more damage than Reggie, while being a safer character. So, in my opinion, he's not that strong. Now, would I give him a dash? No. I think right now where Regulator fails is just the lack of map choice. If there were larger maps in the game, then he would be a stronger character. But right now, as it stands, there's only like one map where you'd want to pick him, and the rest are all either too short or have too much full cover, so he can't get line of sight. So him as a character, not a bad character. It's just the game is always fighting against, well, he is a bad character, but he is not enabled by any comps or maps as of right now, in my opinion. So he is inconsistent. He's not necessarily lagging, because he does a metric ton of damage, that's for sure. Alright, so that's it for fire powers. Lastly, we got supports. Now this one is going to take a little bit of, the first one is going to take a little bit of explanation, I think. So, first up we have Mebs. I want to be really clear about this one right out of the gate. I'm not saying that in this particular case, I'm not saying Mebs is the strongest support. Statistically, I think they're good, but I don't think they're necessarily one-for-one the best support. However, I do think that Mebs has the highest consistency and is consistently a good pick. Okay, so Mebs has a through-wall shield, a basically global heal. The one damage is pretty ho-hum, and I guess that's where Mebs fails, is their damage output is kind of a meme. But their support, so really how important is it really? And then having the potential free action heal that also gives Energize is a really big deal. Like, so if you have Lovana and Mebs on the same team, like, holy smokes, right? That's insane synergy. Oh yeah, and then the trap being a through wall 20 heal and 20 damage, that can be really high value, however you can't move. So, like, Meb's numbers statistically are a little low in terms of the stat lines on the abilities, but it's the consistency and the ability to hit those abilities without putting itself in danger. That's where Mebs shines. And yeah, they have low damage and their healing is kind of okay, but all of it added up, you can always be supporting an opponent or an ally. And like, if an ally is way out of position, boom, 40 shields, or typically 40 shields from basically across the map. That's really strong. That's really strong. And yeah, but their damage is quite low. But consistency-wise, for supports, I think Mebs is the best one. So that is why they're in the S tier. And I want to make that clear. Okay? There are other supports that will have higher damage and higher healing, but I think Mebs has the consistency. that you want out of a support. So I had to get that out of the way, and that is the only support that I have in S tier, actually. Then Chloe. Chloe is kind of like Mebs in that they can usually consistently get healing and damage off. They actually have a dash, whereas Mebs does not. And having a dash as a support is a commodity in this game. Chloe does okay damage and healing, but it did recently get buffed, which is nice. At least for her, because the drone's damage points and healing are kind of pitiful. The drone is mostly there for the AoE and sort of the zone control, whereas Chloe herself is the one who wants to be doing the healing. However, applying 48 shields onto one target, or even multiple targets, or like 30 onto multiple targets, like you can get a lot of shielding value off of Chloe, which is really powerful. And then, like I already said, having a dash, and then the ultimate is huge. It, like, you're getting probably easily 90 stat points, at least 90 stat points. So like 30 damage to an enemy, 30 healing to another ally, and then 30 healing to you at least. That's huge. So if you hit one more ally, that's 120 stat points. Or if you hit like 2 enemies and an ally, and you, like, oh yeah, it adds up. It's crazy. So it feels like you're just peppering damage and healing, but it really does add up. And if you get that really juicy shield on somebody, it's awesome. And then having such a far range dash is quite powerful as well. Again, that's where proper drone control comes into play. So as long as you can manage where the bird goes, you're good to go. And the fact that you can heal with the ulti, or even just heal from across the screen, really powerful. And heal in AoE, no less. Real consistent character. Pretty good. The only reason that they're a bit behind Mebs and not in the consistently strong category is because it's all cone based, and having cone based healing and cone based damage in a lot of maps and a lot of situations can be very annoying, because some maps Chloe feels awful. Like you just can't get the hits where you need them, you can't get the line of sight where you need them, and it kind of just falls apart. Whereas Mebs, you know, you can always have that line of sight, you can always have that shielding, and that's quite valuable. So Chloe, really strong pick. Next up, Esme. Esme is sort of the firepower support hybrid. She positions like a firepower, she works like a firepower, she wants to be shooting like a firepower. So if you run Esme, you're basically running like a 3 or a 2.5 firepower, half a support, 1 frontline composition. The thing with Esme is, while she does have higher healing values in a burst, her healing over time is quite low. So, for example, with Chloe, if you were to, I don't know, say shield for 48, that's 48 effective health, right? And then maybe the next turn you healed, and you healed for whatever they heal for, but then you did it again and again and again, right? And then maybe your opponent, or not your opponent, your ally is under your drone, which is 10 more shields. So there's just a lot of consistent healing. Whereas Esme, she has her pew 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 for a triple heal, which feels rough to use as a triple heal. She has her ulti field medic for only 15 health, which is pretty meager. 50 energy for 15 health, but it is a free action. And then she kind of relies on being near her teammates to pop her passive, which is both good and bad. It sort of makes Esme difficult to catch out by herself, but it also means that she has to go in harm's way with another ally. But she has a dash, just like Chloe. Pardon me. She has a dash just like Chloe, which is good, especially as a support. Not to mention that her dash is a weaken, so she brings a lot to the table. Her damage isn't that bad. Her burst healing is very good, but her sustained healing is not so great. And I think her shield and AoE is a pretty weak ability in general. It's not really that great. It's more just, oh, I have this off cooldown, I guess I'll use it now. And that's kind of what it feels like, honestly. Yeah, you kind of have to stay clumped up for Esme to gain any real value or any real sustained healing, and that's sort of where she can struggle a bit. But still a great pick. Just, you maybe want a composition that sticks together. You wouldn't want to run someone like a regulator, right? Maybe not the best choice with an Esme, things like that. And that's actually it for A tier, which already is probably a hot take. So next up here, Ozzivania. So Ozzy is a bit of a weird one. She herself cannot be healed. Let's just get that right out of the way. On the flip side though, she does get shielding, which means she effectively has 8 extra health um, every turn. And so if she's behind cover, then that's even better. However, and she has good CC, she has pretty good healing values, she has a weaken, she has shielding, like she has the full meal deal as a support. However, her lack of a dash, her lack of a self-peel without committing the ring to herself, which is pretty bad, you wouldn't want to do that, and her incredibly short-ranged one attack means that if she is caught out by herself, it can be pretty tricky for her to get away. And because of how stubby the one is, she is usually in harm's way, so you have to play her almost like with a frontliner, or as a secondary frontliner. And then, in order for her to actually heal allies without the ring, you have to Ice Angel them, so shield them, which reduces their cooldowns. That's really strong. But then you have to one them, which means that you have to be within 5 squares of your ally. Now let's think about this for a second. If you're within 5 squares of an ally, in range of which you could hit a cone, you know, like, you're pretty close. And so, that can create different problems altogether. The ring is really good though, being a root and a heal, but it's only 20 health as opposed to some of the other like sustained healing from other allies or other supports, excuse me. So Ozzivania, kind of like Esme, does pretty good damage if left to her own. Has CC, has healing, but the thing is the sustained healing and the sustained damage I think is a bit lacking. She's a very bursty character, but on the flip side, she herself can get bursted because you can't heal ever. So put it this way, if you put Ozzy down to like 20 health, right, and then she gets away, it's like, okay, well now she can never show her face again. You'd almost rather not kill her at that point. Not quite, but kind of get what I mean. So she can't really, like, she wants to stay in the fray until she dies, and that's not good. Like, her whole gimmick is just heal and deal damage until I die. That's not really great, in my opinion. I also don't really know what comps you'd pick her with, and that's sort of why I'm not sure. She's a niche pick, like, but she doesn't benefit from anything other than, again, bringing that AoE root. So sure, you could synergize with, like, Yuri Nuke, I guess. But if you root them, then they're not going through traps, and because the AoE happens in the prep phase, you can't. Yeah, it's just a bit weird. She's a bit of in an awkward position, but her stats are very good, right? Like her damage and healing can be very high. It's just she herself can get bum rushed down pretty quick, and having no healing is a big yikes. It really is. You have to be playing so well for Ozzy to really shine, and if you're playing really well, then she is insane. But if you make any mistakes as Ozzy, you're just screwed. Whereas at least Chloe, Esme, and Mebs, the characters above her, you can make mistakes at those characters and live to tell the tale. Whereas Ozzy, not really. And that's sort of the best way to put it, in my opinion. Alright, next up, Winifred. So Winifred, this one's probably a hot take, too. People probably think that Winifred could be a little higher, but I don't, and I'll tell you why. Winifred it's all preventative, it's not really proactive. Or, it's all proactive, not reactive. So, I'll explain. Winifred's one ability does heal. Heals for 12. And it does 24 damage, which is a 36 stat line ability. That's pretty good, assuming it hits an enemy and an ally. However, 12 healing on a move that, you know, or 12 healing on your primary is good, but then when you consider that the shield ability, the 40-20 or the 50, is a full action, and then using the big reveal beam of light is a full action, and you start to sort of see it's like, okay, but Winifred is effectively doing nothing some of these turns, and if we don't shoot the target that he gave the 40 shields, it's like, wow, well there goes 40 shields, right? Like, it's just a lot for a character to commit a full action to, in my opinion. Whereas on the flip side, if you overheal an ally,
that still counts as effective shielding. So, for example, if an ally is 120 HP and you were to heal them with Winifred for, let's just say you healed them for 12, right? That means you effectively have 132 health, not 120, right? So it sort of acts like a small shield. Um, and that's sort of where my problems with Winifred lay, is other than their ulti, the rest of it is all very predictive, and you're just hoping that it works. Has no dash at all. Um, and it's really difficult to set up that big ray of light later on in the game. So early on, yeah, absolutely. Like turn 2, if you move into a position, and then, you know, turn 3 or turn 2, your allies move into a position on turn 3 where they can get the shielding. Yeah, it feels really good. The thing is, that's sort of where it ends, right? Other than that, you're starting to use it to reveal people if they Kata more than you are using it to shield allies. And you're better off just using your one ability anyway to heal people, because now health bars are getting lower, so you want to be healing and yada yada. So I just find that Winifred's 2 starts to lose value really quickly. Their free action is pretty good for a free action. The diffuse healing. The ult is pretty good if you can get high value out of it, but if you just hit like one target with it, not the best. So in general, I think Winifred's value is reliant on like an opportune world where you can actually use the reveal light beam off of cooldown, but the reality is that's not what's going to happen. And so for that reason, I think Winifred is a little bit of a flex pick, not a bad support, but you know, if Esme or Chloe was taken and let's say, you know, Mebs was banned, you could probably pick Winifred. Or if you've got a lot of healing on your team just inherently, so maybe you've got Croc, because if you shield Croc, he still gets that as healing, I believe. So if you've got Croc or if you've got Dargrim, Dargrim is pretty good to pair with Winifred because Dargrim can be healed by Winifred, and then the Winifred light beam can break off and hit the opponent, which then heals Dargrim again. So synergies like that are pretty good, but the thing is, if you went to do that, you could just pick Chloe and have more sustain, more survivability, and have the same synergy, right? So Winifred on paper looks ridiculous, like, oh my god, 40 shields, oh my god, 30 shields, holy crap, like 34 healing on my ulti, holy crap. But Winifred wants your team to be grouped up with the ulti and the shielding, and that's where I think Winifred struggles. He doesn't really work well when your team is spread out. He loses a lot of value, and for that reason, I think he's just a bit of a flex pick. I don't think he's inherently weak, but having no dash like Ozzy and having shields as opposed to healing, which means, again, you're making a read that the damage will be dealt as opposed to just flat healing, which is always valuable. You know, that's why the numbers are so high, and for that reason I think he can lose some value there. Whereas Esme and Chloe on the flip side, they both have shielding and healing on a regular basis, and that's just a bit better. And like Ozzy, he can't really sustain himself, keep himself alive. So yeah. And that's it for the B picks, and so we are almost at the end here. We have Agnar. So Agnar is on paper quite powerful, right? If you read all his abilities, you see what potency does, and you look at the heal and you're like, holy man, 50 heal and 20 self. Oh, hello. With the follow. Hey, thanks. If you... lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, if you look at the heal and you see 50 health on your ally and then 20 on you, you're like, whoa, 70 stat line, no way! But then you factor in, oh, that's potency 3, which means that if I take any damage this turn, or I'm at 95, I have to ult next turn. That's my problem with Agnar. He has to get rid of his potency. He can't just sit at 100. Whereas if anyone has played Atlas Reactor, Orion could sit at 100, and that made some of his stuff stronger, and he didn't have to burn it, which was really like much stronger. Now in Agnar's case, I don't think that should be the case, because if he could just sit at 100 health, he could constantly generate these 70 stat line heals, which it would be completely ridiculous. Like, that would be broken. Problem is, I don't think it's a very powerful design, because he's only a real threat when he's potency 3, and he's potency 3 at 90 energy, which means he has 2 turns, at minimum, 2 turns before he has to ulti, or use his trap ability, which completely gets rid of a chunk of potency, you see. And so, the trap ability is 30 shields and an AoE, not bad, but at the cost of a potency charge, which he needs in order to have better abilities. His damage mitigation, or where he takes 66% of the damage an ally takes, that's actually a bait. And if you don't understand why that is, it's because the damage is still being dealt. It's just being dealt to Agnar instead of the ally. Here's the thing. Because Agnar has to use his ultimate, if you can push him to the limit to use said ultimate, you already know what he's going to do. You can expect what's going to happen. Like, he can become a very predictable character just by design of the character. Again, he has no dash, and if he doesn't have the line of sight to, or the ability to get the damage mitigation or to shield himself, all these things, he can just crumble. His damage isn't really all that high, again, until he's potency 3. Without potency 3, Agnar is kind of whatever. But once he's at potency 3, he's like, whoa, this character is ridiculous. But then he's only there for 2 turns maximum, right? And so for those reasons, I think Agnar is, he basically embodies the inconsistency aspects of the C tier. He's not a weak character. I don't even think he's a lacking character, other than lacking a dash like Ozzy and Winifred. But he is inconsistent, and he relies on reads. He relies on a bit of luck, and for those reasons, I put him down here. But he can really feel oppressive. If the game goes your way, he can be very snowbally. But if the game doesn't go your way, or the early rounds, like if you don't get a really early juicy damage deferral and charge up that potency, it's like doesn't feel the best. And last up, Zage. So Zage, on paper, Zage isn't really that bad. A lot of unique tools. The fact you have a free action haste and weaken in an AoE is incredibly powerful. A ginormous AoE heal on your ultimate. Traps, which give you energized and heal. Like, there's a lot of healing that Zage has. But the problem is, it's all healing. There's no shielding. There's no CC at all. And so for that reason, if you were to pick Zage and you didn't ban or pick Izanine, Izanine could just like destroy everything Zage wants to do, because the other supports at least offer shielding or utility. Zage doesn't offer either of those things. So she's sort of a one-trick pony in that she only heals as her supportive capabilities. The other thing is her big heal, her healing burst, her 3 ability, I find is just a bit too low of a coefficient for my taste. So it's 20 base and an 8 self-heal, I think. 20 and 8 or 20 and 6, can't remember. I think it's 20 and 8. So 28 stat line for a 3-turn cooldown. Not bad. But, thing is, it doubles only when you're energized. Now that's the thing with Zage. It's like if you're energized, if you're energized, if you're energized. But to get energized, you have to be in an ion cloud, or you pick up an energize, or use a catalyst. Doesn't happen that often. In order to make that heal valuable, you have to then be energized. Otherwise, it's only a 20 heal. So you sort of have to set up and think way ahead of time, like, okay, I'm going to cloud, and then I'm going to heal. Now, sometimes that works, but it becomes, again, very predictable. You already know what's going to happen. The best part about her heal, though, is that she can give Unstoppable to an ally. That's useful. That's quite good. But I might argue that that's more useful than the heal. Yet again, Zage doesn't have a dash. This is a common trend, and her damage output is incredibly low. So overall, I think she's just a little one-track minded as a support. She's not as diverse and doesn't have as much utility as the other supports. She doesn't have the survivability of some of the other supports, and she just her heal is just quite a low coefficient. Like, you look at Agnar, and even without potency 3, it's like, okay, wow, this heal is way better. Your sustain is way better. But where these two characters differ is Agnar, he relies on predictive based things for his potency, whereas Zage can just constantly be healing. And the other thing, not only does she give unstoppable with the heal, but she also gives energy with anything she does that heals, which is most of her abilities. So there is some stuff to like about this character. The problem is she's so squishy, her damage output is so low, and if the enemy team has any anti-healing, whether it's Violetta, Delphinia, Izine, Zay's just useless. Because if she can't heal, she can't do anything. And that's where she struggles. If she can't heal, she can't do anything. Whereas at least Ozzy, Winifred, Chloe, Meb, even Mebs, who does, poor damage, you have this shield, right? So, yeah, there you go. There you have it. There's my closed beta early Farseer's domain tier list. To recap, it is not ordered, so like Zage is not the worst character in the game and Juliet's not the best character in the game. It's sorted by class and then alphabetized, so Dargrim, Delphinia, Vex are not necessarily in that order, etc. Yeah, it's sort of a categorization and a discussion, but it is also a bit of a power level. Again, I don't think that having niche and flex picks is inherently bad. I don't. But I do think having characters like Barb or Frug or like Regulator, they're too weak or one trick pony, where it's like, I don't really want to pick these characters right now. I don't think that's necessarily a lot of fun. And I think Tiamnata and Yuri, they're kind of like, Tiamnata, Yuri, and Regulator all kind of do the same job. And so very little sort of separates them. Things like that could use some fleshing out, so designs could be a bit more refined. But overall, you could pretty much pick any character and feel fine. I think if you're picking any of these bottom 5, though, I think you're gonna feel a little rough. And even in the B tier, like, it's gonna be hit or miss whether these characters feel awesome or awful. Whereas these top 12? Yeah, these top 12 characters, it's like, okay, you can always pick a team of these top 12 characters and feel good about it. And you can honestly combo any of them. Which is why they're all so good. So, anywho, there you have it. Let me know in the comments what you think, and I will see you guys on the next one. Have a lovely rest of your day, and peace out.